Alright, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of The Adventures of the Monk and the Monarch, featuring me, the Monarch, and my co-host, Mildra the Monk.
Hello.
So, when we get into the actual topic, we're going to do something a little different today than we have the past few episodes. And that is, on air, we're going to basically sit down and build an anime.
For those of you more familiar with my own stuff, this is going to be not too far removed from the reconstruction episodes of the Geek Watch podcast.
But as usual, before we get to the actual topic, we're going to discuss what anime we've been watching since the last time we recorded one of these. So what have you been watching lately?
I just finished Ghost in the Shell Arise, which was on my things of I had planned on finishing but never got around to. And if I'm being honest, I'm reminded of the phrase that Einherjar over at Midnight's Edge has called "jumping after Vicula." Basically trying to follow up a popular act and having expectations be skewed as a result.
I'm aware of that. That kind of happened with me playing through Elden Ring. Not anime related, but I know the feeling.
Well, if I'm being honest, Arise seems to want to be a prequel of sorts to Standalone Complex. And in my not so humble opinion, that was a mistake. Putting aside the fact that unfortunately Mary Elizabeth McGlynn did far too good of a job with her portrayal of the Major, to the point that I'd say for a whole generation that's going to be the default default look for that character. The big problem is that by coming after Standalone Complex and trying to be a pseudo prequel to it, it ends up coloring everything that you're seeing, because it's going to be compared to Standalone Complex, and a 4-episode set of 1-hour OVAs isn't going to make that cut. Is it as pointless as Solid State Society was? No, not really. But I think Arise should have been its own thing. And I think a good case in point with that is something that Masamune Shiro had said not too long ago. Because at one point he was asked what he considers the canon version of Ghost in the Shell. Whether it be his manga, whether it be the Oshi movies, whether it be the anime, or even whether it be the PS1 video game, which more people need to play, in my opinion. His argument was that he doesn't consider any of them the definitive version, because each is tailor-made for the medium, tailor-made and optimized, his words, for the medium in question. And I don't think Arise is tailor-made for its particular medium. Not in terms of it being an anime, but it being a 4-episode OVA series.
See, I have a weird thing with Ghost in the Shell, because like that first movie is great on a standpoint of like the visuals are fantastic, the themes were done excellently, so I really like the movie. But past those two aspects, I never thought it was really that great. I know I'm in a minority on this one, but I can never really get that into the rest of the franchise either. Like Standalone Complex was fine. Rest of the movies, I just kind of bored me that I saw. I did not actually take the time to watch Arise because of that.
I'm a big fan of cyberpunk, and as well as to a lesser extent transhumanism. But I think in your case there's the bit of that issue of comparing what came after to that movie. And I should note all of the animated takes have very little similarity to the original manga.
Yeah, I never read the manga, so I don't know what to say about that. And as far as the movie, like, again, I never loved it as much as a lot of people. Like, I like it. It's good stuff. It wasn't a franchise that ever grabbed me like it did a lot of others. Maybe if I were to go back and, like, rewatch a lot of it now, since it was years ago and I never gave it another shot, I may look at it a bit differently, like I did with some of those old Disney movies I rewatched recently. So my thoughts could change if I were to sit down and watch it all again.
At least you're not like some critics who refer to Akira as a poor man's Blade Runner.
Yeah, that's not right. No. As for me, like, this isn't going to be every month, but I basically just watched One Piece again. I've been waiting for like a lot of the other animes that have been coming out this season to start to get closer to finishing before watching. So it's just been me catching up on more One Piece.
I could have brought up Revice, but you said anime, so I can't use that.
I don't even know what Revice is.
Kamen Rider.
Oh, right. But no. I've determined with One Piece what was the arc after Skypiea. The Long Ring Long Land, where everything is just ridiculously long. This has been the worst One Piece arc so far. It's just not funny for the most part, except for Afro Luffy. I did laugh with Afro Luffy.
Mm-hmm.
But that arc kind of falls on the bad side of the line of trying to balance the goofy nature of One Piece with still allowing you to take everything seriously. The whole thing is the Davy Back games is taking crew members from another pirate crew in these weird game setups. But half the time, Luffy just doesn't seem that worried when he loses a member to the other side, which seems a bit out of character for starters, and if not even he's taking everything going on that seriously, it's really hard to take it seriously yourself. At first, I thought I was probably going to be in the minority, because the first time I looked up, like, just getting an idea of what some of people's least favorite arcs were, no one brought up the Davy Back arc. Until I did it a second time, and for some reason I just got a completely different set of results. And it turns out a lot of people really don't like that arc. Some people just don't even seem to remember it exists. Which, at the same point though, if this is the worst One Piece has gotten after a couple hundred episodes, I think it's doing alright. Because I wasn't, like, offended by it or anything. It just wasn't good. Do you remember much about Davy Back, or are you like many of the people who seem to have forgotten it existed?
I am told that if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
I mean, that hasn't stopped us before.
No, but out of respect and the fact that I don't want to get throttled by the murder grandpa, I will say no further. Because Minoru Suzuki is a big One Piece fan.
I mean, I'm a big One Piece fan so far.
Yeah, but you're not the king of Pancrase.
He's not likely to murder you, or I'm not likely to murder you. But I will say, Nico Robin is really close to being my favorite character after these past couple arcs. Though. Her, and because, well, I'm a cook, Sanji speaks to me.
I will admit being partial to Brook.
Brook. Has Brook been a character, and I'm just forgetting who that is?
AKA Soul King, AKA Bones.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen Bones yet.
You will.
Yeah.
And you will understand why I find him an absolute riot.
I will say just a weird thing that I find absolutely hilarious is Whitebeard does not have a beard. I don't know why that's so funny to me. But other than retreading stuff I've already said about One Piece. Which I did last episode.
Is this going to be a recurring thing next month?
No, I will catch up on the summer 2022 anime, so I have something other than One Piece to talk about. Just busy with work, Elden Ring, so I hadn't had the time to watch more stuff as I would have liked.
I am probably going to do a musing one of these days covering the accessibility red herring that people have been throwing about with a FromSoft game for the umpteenth fucking time.
They don't know what they're talking about. Fuck those people.
Anyway, I see.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where every time a FromSoft game comes out, you have a bunch of people talking about how games need an easy mode
and claiming it has something to do with accessibility, even though it doesn't. They just suck.
They are for a while the argument was it needs an easy mode to reach a wider audience. Now the argument is that by not having easy mode, it is somehow discriminatory against disabled people, which is arguably worse. Now the argument is that it needs one for accessibility, i.e., conflating actual accessibility options, like a colorblind mode.
The ability to remap keys would be great for that. Well, not colorblind, but just general accessibility.
Key remapping is not exactly a accessibility option.
See, I think it helped with some people just because some people have kind of fucked up hands, so certain controller setups or default key configurations can be a problem. So I think key remapping is a good thing to start including in more stuff, but that's nothing to do with the difficulty.
I think it's more. I think what's more. I think what's more infuriating to some of them is that Miyazaki isn't in the club, so to speak.
Yeah.
And having the game be having a game that's outside of the club infuriates certain devs.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
And infuriates certain people who you know the tastemakers that we talked about last month.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's those kind of people who I think are butt mad, especially since Miyazaki has made it clear he has no plans on changing.
And I'm all right with that, even if I'm not really that big a fan of Elden Ring. But that's kind of going off onto a completely different topic, and we'd be here a while discussing that one. But all right. So on to the actual topic of discussion for the day. We're gonna sit down and build an anime. Before this, we went over some guidelines like what kind of anime we're gonna be building. Very specifically, we will be building an Isekai. I have been paranoid for ages. I have been saying that wrong. But yeah, let me pull something up here. We do have some guidelines that I kind of set up in advance we're going to be following along. The first, and to kind of specify to everyone why this is one of the ones I wanted to kind of do for building an anime, is I've never liked Isekai anime. So while I've kind of come at this from just someone who's a bit demystified, I don't think this is a bad premise for a show. Just something happening to someone, they end up poofing into another world for one reason or another. It's not a bad idea. I think they tend down it's more some of the cliches and tropes that come along with it. Specifically, I hate self-inserts. I've never liked that as a concept for a main character. And I hate it when they just become overpowered to the point everything becomes a joke.
I think a couple years ago, I did an episode of Geek Watch called How Not to Isekai, about the do's and don'ts of things. And something that I think is very important to do is to make sure to not fall into the trap that certain cynics indulge in when it comes to discussing, say, shonen battle manga, of falling into the Sturgeon's Law. Because a lot of people know Sturgeon's Law as 90% of everything is crap, but a lot of people forget the intent of Sturgeon's Law. Sturgeon's Law was created because the creator of that adage was putting up with a lot of people highly critical of science fiction works, and this was way back in the day when being a science fiction writer put you on the fringe in the writing community. They would take these really bad pulp SF works and proclaim that the entire genre has no merit. And the reason he came out with the term 90% of everything is crap is to demonstrate that it is a very bad argument to use a few cherry-picked examples as emblematic of the entire genre or subgenre or medium or what have you. And am I saying that there aren't stinkers when it comes to Isekai? Absolutely not. But I think it's one of those things where we need to take great care in avoiding sweeping generalizations.
Oh yeah. I think for me, it's not that I think most Isekai is just straight bad. It's there are just tropes that generally come along with the genre that I just don't like.
This brings me into a second thing. I've noticed a kind of trope phobia among writers, where there are a hesitation to write certain things because they don't want to be compared to a trope, or they dislike a trope so much they're writing the exact opposite of that trope without thinking it through.
Yeah, that's kind of would be the opposite problem. Certain tropes exist because I know people like certain tropes and they work. They can be overdone or done badly.
I have had a bit of a resentment towards the way tropes are used in discourse. A lot of it is because the way people use them reduces a story, and it's an easy way to pretend to be the jaded academic. And I despise performative jadedness.
Yeah, just for everyone though, that was basically kind of the some of the mentality that went in for why we put on certain stipulations.
Yeah. Now there were a few stipulations that I had put in that are a little bit
Yes.
more on point. The first of these is knowing what knowing what you are aim, aiming for. Saying that you want to do a fantasy story only tells me just enough to piss me off.
Yeah, that I was a little vague when I said fantasy the first time. Like in my head, I was like, "All right, a sword and sorcery kind of fantasy." I realized after you pointed that out, like I really left that vague, didn't I?
The way you were pitching it to me when we were discussing this in the last few weeks, it came off more as high fantasy than sword and sorcery. Sword and sorcery is not the Dragon Quest light fantasy that I think you were thinking of. Stuff like Conan and Solomon Kane is far more in the realm of sword and sorcery, or the works of Fritz Lieber.
Yeah.
And there hasn't really been even within the fantasy genre within anime, there hasn't really been much in the way of a sword and sorcery entry. I'd say the closest would be Berserk, and even that is a stretch.
Rune Knight, maybe?
Say again?
Rune Knight, maybe? I'm trying to think of the full name, but it was something the Rune Knight is a bit higher fantasy, but
it's not sword and sorcery is not high on the level of the fantastical. That's the reason why I brought up something like Conan. Because even though magic exists in Conan's universe, you're not exactly going to see spellcasters just flinging things around freely.
Yeah. I think we can probably get into like how high magic we end up wanting this to actually be. I'm not exactly sure where we're gonna end up falling by the end of this discussion.
If I had to guess, I'd say you'd probably be aiming for just for its accessibility. You'd probably be aiming for something along the lines of that sort of Gestalt fantasy that you do see in a lot of console style RPGs.
Quite possibly.
But I think one of the key things to bring up when it comes to the whole idea of somebody going into another world is whether or not you want to do the reincarnation thing or have them be spirited away into another world.
Yeah.
I'm far more interested in the latter than the former.
I'm entirely fine with that. I'm not too picky about which way we go in that regard.
But I do the pitch that you had given me earlier on had the idea of a street magician slash illusionist.
Yes.
You know, a performative illusionist who in going into this other world has to contend with the fact that the sleight of hands and stuff that he's done in the past is now actual magic.
Yeah. Well, it's more he ends up in a world where there's, say, actual magicians. So when he does his sleight of hand, like, he's not doing, like, magic. He's doing those sleight of hand tricks, but, you know, it looks like magic.
I'm far more in the mindset of having him doing that kind of thing. That's the reason why I brought up John Carter. And I realize this is a deep cut because the John Carter books are over 100 years old. But if somebody wanted a skinny, especially of the most famous one, A Princess of Mars, I'd recommend they look at the comic book adaptations of it. The key thing with John Carter is that he's a Confederate officer who gets spirited away into Mars. How he got to Mars is not exactly nailed down, but that seems to be less important. That is less important than the fact that he's on Mars, and because of the lower gravity, he's able to leap higher. He's stronger. He's faster. And if this sounds like Golden Age Superman, well, John Carter was very influential. We'll put it that way. And I was tapping upon that kind of idea of being in this other world changes that person in order to fit. I'd say another example is the tabletop RPG The Strange, which is all about dimension hopping, except you're not transporting yourself to different dimensions, you're translating yourself into a form that fits within the rules of the world you're going into.
I can see
Am
that.
I making sense?
Oh,
Am I
yeah.
making sense so far?
You are. See, I hadn't thought too much in detail when this is kind of the idea pitched. I was like saving most of the details for once we actually started discussing it. But
Yeah,
one thing I was thinking is, well, we kind of have to decide what are the rules of magic in this world, and how would that you'd want it to somehow relate to this guy doing street magic, basically. So one thing I'd cross my mind is something pretty common for a lot of different magic settings is like your somatic and verbal components. So one thing that'd be quite simple to kind of show how he would operate within this world is when he starts to learn that like that's how magic operates, he can disguise what he's doing with essentially fake hand gestures and symbols, because he can do all of his stuff without any of that.
there's
by
one
virtue of the
there's
fact
one
it's not real
there's one
magic.
flaw with
Yeah.
there's one flaw with that problem. You're going on the idea that
Yeah.
he's still doing the same old
Yeah.
the same old sleight of hand.
Yeah.
And in a place where magic is not, it is theoretically not only existing but commonplace, people are going to spot that very easily.
See, I don't know if that's would necessarily be the case, especially not.
But
Or at the
moreover, there's the issue. There's a reason why I brought up the whole translating thing. As far my counteroffer is that as far as he knew, the words and gestures that he had been using were just sleights of hand. It's just that they end up becoming magic. He just doesn't know it.
Because I'm almost saying, because fundamentally, I wouldn't think he couldn't like learn how to do actual magic as well. But
He could. He'd just
Yeah.
be spinning. I see him as learning it in in the way that somebody learns by reverse engineering, or learns by improvisation. This is something I picked up from one of my old teachers. But there's 3 different learning methods that humans have: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Visual and auditory, I think, are self-explanatory. Kinesthetic is learning by doing. And I think our hypothetical protagonist in this regard would fall into that third category. Not formal training, but managing to figure it out by just observing it, just by observing things on his own.
yeah, what I'm saying though is like I wouldn't say like his skills necessarily directly translate to say the gesture, but as he learns the gestures, well, he's a street magician. He knows how to like mask what he's doing, hide things, trick people, like using say his sleight of hand to like maybe as he's convincing people he's using some kind of spell. He might not be using a spell in this circumstance. He might be palming stuff. He might be just doing all that magician trickery. And so even if people know like the gestures he's doing at a time, it might be the spell. He might hit him with something completely different they're not expecting.
Even with
Like that's just kind of how I'd started building this in my head for a bit there.
yeah, which I can definitely see where it's going, but I can see some potential holes in that. That's what I've been trying to fill, because world building is extremely important, especially when you're and especially the further and further away you go from a more contemporary world. You have to set up the rules of whatever world you're creating, and make sure that they're consistent. And as nice as somatic and verbal components might be, a la a D&D game, I think it'd be better off with mages with any sort of mage having some sort of focus, some sort of object that their abilities are channeled into. I'd say in the case of our magician, it'd be his gloves. Especially if you're going with the motif of a stage magician, having him use a pair of white gloves as his focus would certainly fit.
I do think that would fit. Like if we give him some kind, if we go the route of focus, which like I'm not against the idea of having the focus. It's not a bad idea.
No, the idea is that if you look at a lot of magic use in various fantasy anime, It is far more in the realm of key with a different coat of paint,
Yeah.
which is why you can have spellcasters get tired more than they just run out of spell slots.
Yeah.
And even with ones that do have certain words and phrases, that's always treated fast and loose. But the idea that magic is a kind of muscle that can be honed the same way you'd hone any other muscle, I'd say is going to establish a much better connection without having to drown in too much exposition about how magic works in this kind of setting. So there you have your two main pillars. It is a muscle that can be developed, but it's one that can be tired out, and you need a focus in order to channel it. Whether that be a book, whether that be a wand, whether that be a blade, it doesn't matter. There is some type of focus.
Still, though, like fundamentally, I think it's important. Like, if since we're going with basically the street magician, I think the skills of someone like that need to become relevant to how he's operating in this world. Otherwise, I don't think there was really a point in really establishing anything about him.
I do think that kind of street magician, street slash stage magician. I will
Yeah.
I will clarify. Um, is somebody who would have skills that would translate, even if he ends up changed through the world jumping. One of them is him being able to read people, cold reading, as it's called in some places, as well as knowing what the right kind of things to say. Basically, the kind of skills that a confidence man has.
Yeah.
And I'd say it's those kind of skills that get him into and out of trouble in equal measure. So if it sounds like I'm going with a bit more of a roguish hero for this kind of thing, well, I kind of am.
Well, I mean, a roguish type here was kind of the only logical outcome once we decided that was going to be his origin, essentially.
Yeah.
Because that's the
Um,
kind of skill set that any kind of magician has, is a rogue skill set.
I would say any of the offensive magic that he has is magic that he's borrowed from other people, like
Yeah.
spirits or the like, who he's tricked into working for him.
Now, at the same point, you could also use his skills, like, if ever he does end up with whatever his focus is, I think I'm happy to stick with the gloves in this case, because I like the idea. But if he's ever, like, detached from his focus, well, he's still going to have the ability to mess with people in various situations, still throw someone off. Like,
Yeah, and I'm not saying that the gloves
Yeah.
have to be the only
Oh, yeah.
focus. As he develops, you could have other typical things be that
Yeah.
focus, whether it be cards or a cane.
yeah. That's what I'm saying. I was like, even if he's deprived of a focus, he's still going to be able to do something because of his
Yeah.
skill set.
Um,
Like,
but
Worth it.
I do want to delve a little bit more into
Yeah.
the world that you're creating.
yes.
Now, when it comes to the type of fantasy, as tempting as it would be to do the Dragon Quest XP that a lot of isekai have
Yeah.
done over the last 5 years, I think the tech level should be pushed a little bit further in terms of what it's being an XP of, because a lot of those takes are trying to do a pseudo medieval approach,
Yeah.
which is nice and all, but I think for something like this we need to jump a little bit further. I am thinking less of that and more of a fantastical XP of Renaissance period.
My only contention there is, like, this almost feels too at place, I would say, in a Renaissance setting than it would in a more fantasy-esque setting. Like, the street magic stuff, I don't know if it would feel quite as out of place, which is somewhat the point of introducing that in the first place.
Fair point. I will rescind that. I do think even with that, would you still have certain motifs like an adventurers guild taking on requests?
Huh. I wouldn't be against that. Like, I hadn't thought too much about the guild nature, but that is something that's quite often seen in Isekai, some type of guild setup.
Oh, it's something that's seen
Yeah.
in fantasy works. Period. Because let's be honest, a lot of roads lead back to Dragon Quest, which may sound ridiculous, but let's not forget it wasn't that long ago when when Dragon Quest had such a chokehold on Japan that the release of a new Dragon Quest could make everything shut down.
Yeah, good old Dragon Quest. But yeah,
Um,
it's also kind of an easy way to just kind of introduce people to a world. Like for a
mhm.
guy who has no idea how this world works when he first arrives, there's a guild. There we go. It's an easy way to learn some rules, figure out how everything operates, maybe start the formings of some kind of party. It's a very effective tool to use. So I'm entirely okay including some type of adventuring guild.
Yeah. Now, the other aspect that I think is worth noting is why people sign up to become adventurers.
So why would they in this? We've got magic, obviously. There's probably going to be some types of like fantastical beasts of some nature, so that might play into it.
I would say it's a few things. One, um, outside the cities is still fairly dangerous territory. Two, the I think for a lot of I think for a lot of folk obviously there's the whole thing with the pay, but I'd say one of the other major reasons the is that most countries actual armies are more focused on defending settlements and not about expending resources going out patrolling the wild. So independents end up filling that void.
Now, with that set up, like I like the idea, but what I'd add to it is they're probably, say in this context, at odds with like other countries. Potentially, maybe there's multiple guilds trying to gather all this intel. I say that because fundamentally, a lot of the skills someone like this street magician would have isn't necessarily going to work on, say, random wild beast number three. Ooh, I can deceive you with my sleight of hands in this magical world. The beast probably isn't noticing a lot of that. So it gives reason for like more conflict with other adventuring groups as well to kind of more thoroughly expand what a guy with this skill set could do.
Uh, that being said, I could see our magician in this case taking on that guild job because of an easy payday and an easy way to to travel without getting hassled about having the right paperwork.
Yeah.
Um, which is in that kind of theory, that's how he'd end up meeting the rest of his quote unquote party.
Yeah. Now here's the question: how much is he gonna let on that his party knows? Like how, like between how much of what he's doing is actual magic, and how much of it is just performative poppycock? Like, do they know all of the stuff isn't necessarily spells he's doing? Do they know what his focus is?
I'd say it'd be I'd say it'd be a 50-50 thing of people looking at him as just this weird magician, just this weird magician with gloves, and then starting to unravel that onion as time goes on.
Yeah, I don't see him being very open about this with many people at all because people start to realize what he's doing. They'll start to see through some of the tricks. Not necessarily all of them, but that's obviously going to put him at a disadvantage.
Yeah, and but I'd say because of his savvy and being able to read people as well as figure things out from a glance, that would lean towards him kind of being positioned as the strategist of an adventuring party.
Oh, yeah. Now, this is something I only kind of started to think about after we were discussing a lot of this, and you brought up, like, the confidence artist stuff and all that. What kind of stuff would this guy have been doing, like, prior? Like, what kind of person just was he before going into this world? Because this skill set could easily be like just a fun kind of street magician. It could be like the con man playing shell games.
Um, I see him as some as I see the way I see it. Um, a a confidence man who was trying to go legit. He got sick of the game. He got sick of the game when was trying to make a more decent living for himself as a street magician. It seemed that he finally was going to get his big break, and then he gets spirited away to a whole new place.
It's kind of thinking something along those same lines. So I think we're in agreement here on that.
Essentially, the theme that I'm kind of going with is that him being, because first off, I've made very clear that that I absolutely despised the ending to Escaflowne.
I only saw the movie.
The movie is a different beast entirely.
I've heard.
But that Hitomi, who has developed all these friendships with, and has unique skills to contribute in this world, all of a sudden at the 11th hour wants to go back to Earth, did not fit at all. And while there are some stories where the idea of someone going back to their own world is certainly apropos, if you look at a lot of stories that could fit within that sort of isekai approach, a lot of the times it's a case of that by the time they finished their journey, why would they even go back?
Yeah, like some shows I watch, I can see why they might want to go back, a la Legend of the Shield Hero. But yeah, others I'm like, yeah, just stay here. You're doing much better for yourself.
And before I could joke about Through the Looking Glass, but one, Through the Looking Glass and Alice in Wonderland is drugs. Two, the whole thing's meant to be taking place in Alice's head anyways. But I'd say the approach that I'm taking, and what could be considered an overall theme, is that of second chances and earning a second chance.
Yeah, because like I imagine when he joins up with the guild as like a mage, he probably hasn't figured out magic yet. So we're kind of going to have to come up with a reason, like, why are his gloves of focus? Like, what makes something a person's focus world? Do they train with it?
I'd say it's either a training, a valuable possession, or something that symbolizes how they visualize magic,
All right.
or how they visualize how they would use it.
All right. So effectively, then they don't go out of their way to pick a focus. Like, as they learn magic, they're going to start to realize what their focus actually is. In this case, it's going to be his glove.
It is very much his gloves, because I see the main way that he would get attention is by his performances with his tricks. And whether that be street performances or on stage performances, he's a showman.
Yeah, and I'd imagine because he's approaching just like magic as he would in the normal world, it's probably stuff people haven't really seen before. I mean, they're probably going to look at it and go, oh, he's just created some weird spells to do some strange things. All right, it's fun to watch. But the guy clearly has some kind of magical talent, just because no one's going to look at that and just register what he's doing. At least not for what it is. So it'd probably be easy for him to at least convince some low-level group. Level's probably not the best word to use, but everyone knows what I'm talking about. But just some early
I'd say that the group that he would be convincing is a group that's together but a bit dysfunctional.
Yeah. Like he probably, I would say, joins up not knowing how to do any actual magic, and is probably it's a fake it till you make it kind of thing. Like fakes knowing how to do magic and slowly starts to realize, oh shit, I might actually be able to do some of this stuff.
I would say that the way I visualize a very early job that he has is dealing with some sort of spirit, and he instead of trying to exercise the spirit, he's like, if I beat you in a game, will you work for me? That game is a case of odds or evens. He's going to draw one card from the deck, and the spirit has to guess whether it's an odd or an even number.
And obviously, well, the spirit's in a world of actual magic. Maybe he can detect magic to some degree. Like, this guy's not using any magic. This is going to be easy. Maybe he tries to use his own magic to mess with the deck, not realizing that's not where that card's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
A case of, like, pitting his street magic against real magic.
That, or I'd say a better solution is that he didn't this isn't a trick deck or something like that, but what he did do is put little notches on each card in braille or some equivalent.
Yeah, just any kind of magician tomfoolery could work.
So
here.
while the spirit might make it look like it's a card that favors him, in reality he just changed how it looked. He didn't change the feel of it, because obviously a spirit wouldn't know about that.
Yeah. Like, I think there's multiple outs you have to how to handle that situation. Again, you could do the thing with the marked cards, so even if the card looks different, he's going to be able to show it's not that card or that the spirit fucked with it. Loading cards from other places. There's so many ways you can get around this and make it believable.
that and busting the spirit for cheating.
Yeah. See, that seems kind of weird because fundamentally that's all he does is cheat. Or at least that's all he did.
That's the irony of it.
But yeah, I'd be fine going either route on that because it all works and makes sense.
But in that kind of thing, he positions himself as some. In the past, the way I see it is that in the past, when he was a confidence man, he was the leader. He was the leader of a group, who would screw people over with their schemes.
Yeah.
Now he's part of a group of adventurers doing some actual good.
That said, he busted him because he whipped out a rigged deck, so not entirely reformed quite yet, but that's fine.
Yeah, and even with the thing of reformation, that's not to say that he wouldn't do things like palm somebody's pockets as he's walking by him in a tavern or something like that.
Oh yeah, he's still gonna do his roguish stuff, just generally in favor of the greater good rather than lining his own pocket now.
Mm-hmm. In that same vein, when it comes to his compatriots, you could probably go with the old warrior, rogue, and mage in the more traditional sense of the three who have to do a better chunk of the fighting, along with the whether it's a spirit or a demon or just some supernatural entity that he has contracted to himself.
Yeah. To effectively allow him to use magic, then I'd assume. Oh.
He would be able to channel that particular being through his body in order to use more offensive stuff.
So I'm just trying to think then how this relates to basically how people would learn magic. Like, is it normal that they're going to contract through some kind of supernatural entity? Can it be learned entirely on one's own given the time?
I would say that sort of contracting is a case of it can be done, but you're playing with fire.
All right.
Mostly because, well, making a deal with the devil, you know how that ends up.
Yes. And now, just because, like, the focus wasn't, like, teaching our guy just all the high-end magic, but kind of a mix, I don't think we need to contract him to, like, some really powerful spirit.
I'd say the spirit itself is powerful, but the catch is how much of that power can his body take.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You know, much in the same way that a extra dimensional being's avatar can be stronger or weaker depending on circumstance, but it's still just some sort of fragment of their ability.
Yeah, use too much, you're gonna hurt yourself. Like, you know, this is not exactly that, but we're basically talking My Hero Academia 1 for All. at least near the beginning, where you use too much of the power, you're gonna hurt yourself. But
I'd
not
say
contracted through somebody.
I'd say in this case the way keeping with that whole focus thing, it would end up working is that that demon uses his body as a focus in order to manifest its powers. The catch is that because of the fact that that body already has something taking up inside it, the two can't mix for too long, and one of them's going to get ejected.
That could be quite interesting. It kind of gives us some reason to discuss what kind of demon this is, like, and how their relationship's actually going to play out.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, is it going to be a friendlier relationship? Are they going to be adversarial the whole time? There's a few different ways you could go with that.
I would say it's adversarial that grows into begrudging respect.
I'm all right with going that route.
Oh, much in the vein of, well, if this guy dies, then I'm not going to be able to challenge him again and beat him to undo the contract.
Yeah. Now, one thing I'd want to bring up is I think when he forms the contract, like, it'd probably be after he goes out with whatever the first adventuring party is. Because I don't think it's likely he's going to just come across this spirit in the middle of the city.
No.
But when he plays the game and makes the contract, I think he should be separated from the rest of the group, whoever they end up being, just so they don't realize that's how he started learning, like, actual magic. It might break the illusion.
Perfectly fine with. And as far as what sort of magic he uses whenever he's channeling that demon, I would say that it falls into the category of a lot of elemental magic. It's just that his elements always look different. Like, instead of if he was casting a fireball spell, the fire would be green instead of red.
Yeah. Now, we're gonna say that's a nature of just, like, how magic goes. Like, certain people, because of how they cast magic, it'll come out looking different. Or is the weird coloring more of a result of the spirit?
The latter.
All right. So it's going to become obvious to some people that something's off here. Like, there's a spirit involved, maybe.
Which is all the more reason that using this kind of thing would be more of a last resort deal.
Yeah, because, like, his normal magic probably already looked really weird to some people. Again, just because they're not used to it. But when you start throwing in, like, his more offensive elemental stuff, certain people who are knowledgeable about magic are going to go, this guy's doing something weird here. This isn't normal magic.
I'd say the other factor, bringing up one for all. I'd say the other factor is that there is no subtle button when it comes to that magic.
Yeah. Now I still see him using it as ways to, like, also cover for his non-magical magic tricks, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm more going with the fact that whenever he uses a spell that through that demon, it's not like throwing a little bolt of lightning or anything like that. It's more like summoning a storm or throwing the fireball equivalent to a bag of Semtex at the enemy.
Oh yeah, I'm just saying.
The point is collateral.
Oh, go on.
The point is collateral damage is going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just saying, like, he's still a magician, though. Like, he's gonna make use of that as, like, distractions, or maybe even use his normal trickery as distractions to land the big spells. Like, I see him using both skills, like, in tandem when he can.
Yeah, it's just that the demon's magic is not something that has subtle levels.
Oh, unsettled things make for fantastic distractions.
Yeah, but it also means that the buildings that nearby buildings or nearby areas are gonna get fucked up in the process. You know, all the craters and all the burnt forest and all that stuff.
I don't know if I want, like, that level of destruction coming out of the spells he's using. At least not consistently. Maybe if he really gets desperate and is willing to put his body on the line.
Mm-hmm. And it'd be tempting to say that this contract is draining his life, but I don't want to go that route. I'd rather go the route of
It's just
of it.
taxing on him as he's using it.
Yeah, a using that and going all out for a few seconds is going to knock him out just from exhaustion.
Yeah. Now we're gonna say there's like degrees he can bring that power out. Like, can he do just like a small normal fireball if he's focusing, or is it always just gonna be big crap ejecting out of his hands or sky or whatever?
The more controlled magic use would be used by the mage of the
Yeah.
party. And I should note, when it comes to the other three party members, I did kind of want to go with the idea of them playing very much two type. The warrior type is very much plays to the archetypes of someone who's the tank, the biggest one of the group, tends to be the act first, think later. And I know it seems like I'm playing to obvious tropes with that kind of thing, but the best way that I could visualize it is that they are the big brother gym rat kind of person. Is from my own experience, gym rats, the kinds of people who I will see in the gym all the time, they are far more wholesome than people would think. There's a reason why I joked a while back when I was discussing Mob Psycho 100 that the best way to describe gym rats, the Body Improvement Club.
Yeah. Like, they can annoy me sometimes, but that's just because I don't like people. But they're generally a very friendly group.
Hmm.
I've had nothing but good experiences dealing with the gym rats when I've gone to the gym.
Yeah, but I'd say instead of the typical rogue, we already have some of that with
Yeah.
with our magician.
Yeah.
I'd lean more towards the ranger archetype.
See, I'd lean more for making like the more rogue type an adversary, because they might be able to piece at least some of what's going on together. Like, I know I
The
said,
reason why I went with something more ranger like
but yeah,
is somebody who knows their way around the wilderness.
yeah. I was just bringing that up because I think at some point, like, an actual rogue type might make a more interesting adversary than an ally.
I'd rather put that in a rival adventuring party
Yeah.
than in the same party.
Exactly.
And as far as where I'd lean the mage, that would be more into more of a lore master in the vein of certain old school wizards. The person who has a lot of knowledge about things, the person who's essentially book smart.
Yeah.
Uh,
Now, do we want just
and
a 4-man group here? Or do we want to add
yeah,
a fifth person? I think a 4-man would be
I,
a good one.
like the only I thought about adding a fifth,
Yeah.
I one of my favorite writers is Riku Sanjo, and Sanjo has gone on record as saying that he's not very good with large casts because he likes to give a lot of attention to each member of the main cast that he writes
Yeah.
with. Um,
I kind
which
of
I
had
think
an
is
upper limit of 5 people, but 4 I'm
I
good
had
with.
I had considered a fifth person, but the reason why I didn't is because I was trying to think of an angle that where I could have them be unique in the format, and nothing was coming.
Yeah.
Everything that was coming out with was a little too similar to ground that we've already tread with the other four.
Fair enough. So we've
Uh,
got the ranger type, we've got our gym rat big brother, and we have our scholarly wizard.
I'd say the if I wanted to make a when it comes to the ranger type, the way I'd probably work with them is that they know the ins and outs of the wilder areas, and animal habits and all that, and has a particularly twisted sense of humor in terms of not of giving somebody the grisly details on the feeding habits of certain monsters. Nah,
Probably why they ended up spending a lot of time out in the wilderness as a ranger.
well, that and doing it just to fluster the
Yeah.
mage who probably is as close to the glasses wearing nerd as you could get in this kind of setting.
I almost think it'd be funnier if we gave like the more like the weird details of just eating habits and excrement might bother the gym rat more. Just because that's a bit more unexpected than the shadow
No,
way nerdy,
I'd
but
the way I see him, it wouldn't phase him. I kind of the way I see it, our big brother of this foursome is something of the straight man to a lot of the other antics.
I can see that.
Um,
Kind of piecing together in my head what this party is kind of looking like.
yeah,
Yeah, so Gym Rat Straight Man. That'd actually be kind of funny.
somebody who whenever who probably spent a good amount of time as a bouncer before they took up adventuring.
Now, how much of this
Or
group
who's
are we going to say, like, knew each other prior to whatever this initial outing's going to be? Like, were these...
I would say that the three of them had met in the past, but they were looking for that one big job that would help get them noticed.
Yeah.
The problem is because of the fact that one has a bad sense of humor, one is a bookworm, and the other one is trying to hold the other two together. They have a profound losing record.
Like, I don't think I wanted to, like, have a long
they've been
history together. Like, they were a somewhat recent creation before our guy showed up.
I'm kind. The time thing is something that can be something that can be played coy with. What I'm kind of going with is that they've been relegated to low level adventuring stuff, the D rank adventures and jobs.
Yeah.
Slime clearing and stuff like that.
Yeah. I imagine whatever job they were suddenly given to start with ended up a bit over their heads going somewhere that has a spirit. Or I don't know, maybe somehow the spirit set up that job. And just ended up with that sorcerer who he was not our magician who he was not expecting to be there.
The approach that I'm going with is that the key thing that I kind of want to go with is that at the very start, our adventuring party is a bunch of underdogs.
Yeah.
They are not the future heroes of legend or anything like that. The kind of people that would look like main characters in another show.
Yeah.
No, these guys are the misfits. If you need an example of what kind of energy I'm going for, did you ever see the teaser trailer for Overstrike, the game that would later become the disappointment that was Fuse?
I know I saw it, but it did not leave an impression.
It left a bit of an impression for me simply because of how it was framed. When you just look at it as a self-contained story, and eventually it came out in the form of Fuse, which was a massive disappointment because they listened to a focus group that said it looked too kiddish. Which, if there's any lesson to take from that, don't listen to focus groups. And
slightly unrelated, Louis the Rune Soldier. That's the show I was trying to think of earlier. I just figured it out.
Yeah,
I was saying Rune Knight, and I'm like, yeah, that's not the right name.
I can't think. I don't think that counts as sword and sorcery either.
It doesn't, but I just realized it just crossed my mind. Like that's what I was thinking of like 30 minutes ago.
And is this a bad time to mention that takes place in the same universe as Lodos?
Oh right, it does. I forgot about that. But anyway, that's completely off what we were talking about just a second ago.
Yeah, and while it might seem a bit self-inserty to say that this dysfunctional adventuring party becomes less dysfunctional once our magician joins the group. I don't think it really is, because it's more the fact that the key thing that I'm going with is that they have the tools to succeed. The thing that holds them back is not having proper direction.
Yeah. Like they needed some kind of mind that could bring these three people together and form a cohesive whole.
And that's what our magician is.
Yeah. Also, I think with this setup, it gives a fair bit of interesting ways he could make use of both his little spirit magic we're going to grant him with relatively early, as well as some fun bits of trickery. Like, I think him and the Ranger could have quite a bit of fun together.
Yeah, there's also the fact that when it comes to said spirit, I see that spirit as being a voice in our magician's head that only he can see and hear.
Yeah.
So you have the bit of awkwardness whenever the two of them don't get along on something.
And everyone else in the group's just wondering what's going on. Like,
Hmm.
I imagine it wouldn't be long before the wizard figured it out. After like a few castings of the actual magic, that there might be a spirit involved, just because of the differences we discussed there'd be between like the typical spells and the things he's throwing out. Not
Hmm.
that she'd ever hear what he's saying and doing, but they'd probably be the first to figure out something's going on with it.
I can certainly go with that.
No, I think we've got a good basis for the world, magic, and how it works. Spirits are clearly a factor. I'm not sure how
Spirits.
big of a factor they're going to end up being, but
Um, the approach that I have is that back in is that in the old days there were practitioners who used magic by making deals with devils and other spirits, but that ended up backfiring so hard that civilization is gone. So that fulfills your ancient race quota.
yeah. And I think it'd be easy enough to say whatever job they went on just ended up bringing them to some kind of old ruin where one of these spirits happened to be, for one reason or another. So that gives us a good reason how all of this starts.
Yeah, and within those and within that, I'd say instead of you'll notice that I'm not trying to do a overarching story with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
The approach that I've been taking is that the setting is the biggest character,
Yeah.
and what you have are just four adventurers trying to make a living. If you wanted to do an arc, you could go with the idea of them having to deal with a rival group that shows up from time to time as a foil. Um, but a full on arc in the traditional sense, I don't see enough reason to do that in this case.
Yeah. Like, essentially, establish the world, the rules it operates by, and the characters. From there, you could easily start coming up with a good variety of just arcs, antagonists. You could build on that if, for some reason, we were to sit down and, like,
With
map
I
out
was
an
I
anime
was
beginning to end.
I was kind of leaning into adventure of the week kind of things
Yeah.
in order to reflect the fact that this is a kind of setting where you could tell any kind of story.
Or at least a good variety of kinds of stories.
Mhm.
But yeah. Because, like, even with just this setup, there's a lot of things that I'm able to just piece together you could do. Like, we mentioned having a rival party with an actual rogue in it, which could cause some complications for our magician trying to keep some of his stuff a secret.
Hmm.
There's always the potential for rival spirits as well, remnants of the old world. All kinds of things you could do with just adventuring in the wild. The interesting moment where if perhaps some foe is able to concoct like an anti-magic circle, you could probably have some fun with, considering our main character's non-magical abilities. Just a lot of different things I think you can tell within this context that would make
Yeah,
sense
but
for the characters.
all that
Yeah.
is beyond the scope
Oh,
of
yeah.
this.
Oh yeah, this is just setting up enough to where you have a foundation to tell these kind of stories rather than sitting here and writing them all out. Now, just fundamentally, is there anything else we would need to basically establish about this world now?
Um, I was gonna say, possibly what sort of races were involved, but you can pretty much go with the standard fantasy
Yeah.
races, and most of the work is done for you.
Yeah. I'd almost want to not do that because it feels too easy, but I also don't want to sit here and build a variety of races because that would take hours.
The reason why I didn't go into that part is I don't think it's that important.
Yeah.
Compare compare at least compared to other avenues. You could have it that there's certain tensions, but one of the key characters that I'd like to establish besides the world is the hub city where they get their guild jobs is.
Because we've already kind of established, alright, there's a lot of, like, just danger out in the world outside of the towns.
Hmm.
So, like,
Um,
are we having, like, one city where there's just one guild? Are there going to be, like, different countries, like, scattered about with their own guilds?
there are others I'd say, but I'd say a key thing is that
Yeah.
there's an ancient rule that the adventuring guilds are to be left alone. I.e., there's a governing body that has the mindset of we will provide support to any nation that needs it when it comes to dealing with monsters, but we do not get involved in national politics.
Yeah.
Do not involve us in national politics. And if adventurers are kept from crossing borders because of some politics, then we will take action.
I'm entirely
Essentially,
alright with that.
essentially, some sort of organization that you don't see manages the adventuring guilds and keeps them independent from any
Yeah.
one nation.
I'm entirely alright with that. Also opens up more avenues for just like people trying to interfere with these old rules. If you ever wanted to go that route in writing the stories.
Yeah, if you were to go that route, I'd probably go with the idea that
Yeah.
just before they try, a representative is sent, and they make very clear, don't fuck with us.
So I figure then the various countries probably aren't entirely on the best of terms for one reason or another, considering how strict that policy probably is. It,
I'd imagine they probably have tried to entice adventurers
yeah,
to leave the guild and join that nation's military.
yeah. I imagine
But the
that'll
amount of
have
people that
happened.
have
They've probably tried
the,
to get their own plants in the guilds at some point or another. I'm sure they've done something along those lines.
yeah, and I'd imagine that when it comes to the people who run the adventuring guild, uh,
Yeah,
at, pretty much run all of the guilds, they didn't take kindly to that
yeah.
and dealt with the problem.
But yeah, I don't mind that setup. It's been used before, but it's been used before because it's quite effective.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to go
Oh
with the
yeah,
idea that that the Adventurers Guild has some corrupt leadership
yeah.
at the top, but more of they are they are fanatically independent, a radical
Mhm.
centrist, if you will.
Yeah. They're more concerned about just keeping people safe, dealing with whatever's going on in the wild, be it these old ruins that may or may not have spirits,
Hmm.
potentially rogue tribes or bandit groups, various wilderness hazards.
Yeah,
They're more just worried about keeping everything safe from that rather than dealing with, oh, who's going to run this country? They
because
have a salt war.
as old as the guild is, they've probably seen nations and
Yeah.
political upheavals come and go
Yeah.
many times.
So we're dealing with a very old and long-standing guild that has been
Yeah.
around probably as long, if not longer, than some of these countries.
Hmm. And the idea of siding with one could have massive repercussions down the line that they're constantly thinking about. So they have the policy of we'll help you when it comes to keeping people safe within your countries. Just don't fuck with us.
Yeah. So yeah, not against working with the actual nation's governments, just not in a way that's going to impact their relationships with other countries as well.
Hmm.
All right.
And it's not like this would be something that would show up all that often, because I'm far more in the mindset of keeping certain mysterious organizations mysterious.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think is like if there's anything else that we need to like establish for groundwork because I think we've
Uh,
got most bases covered.
when it comes to the method of how the magician arrives in the place,
Yeah.
I know that certain isekais have it that they end up being transported there on the whims of some god or goddess of a given world. That's not the or that
Yeah.
they're summoned. That's not the approach that I'm going to be. There's two approaches I'm thinking of. One is that a summoning ritual was done at one point a long time ago, but something got botched, and the summon didn't take place until hundreds of years later.
And probably didn't summon what they wanted.
One, didn't summon what they wanted. Two, the people who tried the summoning ritual are all dead, because you're reaching
Yeah.
across space and time. That probably has its gambits.
Yeah.
So the spell didn't go off until hundreds of years later, and destination wasn't specific, so he literally dropped in.
Yeah. And what was the other idea you were thinking?
The other idea that I had thought of was him finding a book by on Earth by somebody else who had been doing world hopping.
So either way, the premise is like he wasn't brought here intentionally. He ended
No.
up here by some kind of fluke.
Yeah.
I'm all right with that.
One of them is the former is a very Terry Pratchett way to do things. The latter leans a little bit into Brandon Sanderson, but the sole reason I wanted to do it was to show that to give kind of the hint that the whole world hopping thing goes both ways.
So theoretically, if he wanted, he might be able to find a way back home if that's the route you want to go.
In theory, if you wanted to go that route, but I kind of wanted to go with the idea that people have hopped between worlds for centuries. It's just that a lot of times it's hard to actually tell.
Yeah, I don't mind the idea. Plus, it's another thing that opens up more options for just stories you could tell, especially if someone from the normal world shows up who does understand what stage magic is. Might look at this a little weird if they've been there for a while. Just as like a random possibility. I'm not sure how.
As interesting as that would have been, it might cheapen things.
Yeah.
But I'd say that about covers everything.
Yeah. So what we have so far, we have an Isekai world set up with some pretty good groundwork, I think. We have a guy who's there who has an actual set of abilities that matter for coming into this Isekai world. Like he didn't just show up and was given all of his powers and abilities. Like who he was will actually matter. There's a lot of interesting ideas for stories you could tell. You could do either a like adventure of the day type thing, or there's ways you could do like a bigger story arc if you also wanted.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get too much into detail about characters and personalities, but I don't think that'll be really necessary right now. Yeah, I think this could actually be an interesting show if it ever got made for some reason.
Oh, there's always the possibility of writing it out in one form or another. But I've got too many ideas that I'm writing out as it is, so I'd have to put that one in the back burner.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I still need to work on right now too and catch up on. One day maybe, but I make no promises.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So yeah, I think we've effectively built the premise of a potentially good anime.
Mm-hmm.
Could avoid some of the tropes that I just personally don't like. I think it still keeps the feel of what an isekai is going for.
And if we need to do something harem related, we can always have it that he's a bit of a womanizer.
I'm kind of bored of harems. I've been seeing them since Tenshi Muyo.
No, I'm not saying I'm not saying full on harem. I'm saying that he ends up getting a reputation around certain parts of the city, or just to act as a host as a side job.
That's possible. I could see him being able to do it considering his skill set. It's just one of those things I've seen a lot of. So my mind just kind of clicks off a little bit sometimes when I hear it.
I think, if I'm being honest, I think you're closing off a little premature on that.
Yeah, like it can be funny, it can be interesting. I'm just kind of bored of that idea. I've seen it so much. That's not a knock against it or saying like I wouldn't be willing to see what we could do with it. I just don't know how much interest I have in exploring it. Alrighty then. So I think we pretty much established everything we need to in relation to this topic.
Yep.
If anyone's interested who hears this, feel free to give more ideas or put something together if you want. And any closing thoughts then?
I think we've covered everything that I planned on covering.
Excellent. Alright. So with that said, I think this wraps up the 4th episode we're on now.
Yep.
I guess next time, we'll see you. That is a horrible close. Next time, we'll see you.